Hello and welcome to TGP Interview video series. We're taking you behind the scenes of some of your favorite games and developers. Today we are starting with a ex-Valve developer, David Saunders. He was a previous developer of Portal 2, Left 4 Dead 2, and some other Valve games. I hope you enjoy the following video. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thanks to David Saunders for taking the time to join us. Like all of you, I've been a huge fan of Valve games my whole life. You never forget who introduced you to these games. David has worked on some of our favorite classics like Portal 2, Left 4 Dead 2, and Alien Swarm. Can you tell us your role within Valve and what started your journey in the gaming industry?
A contractor to go and find and fix bugs in Left 4 Dead 2, and they hired me on about 6 months before we shipped. This was in, July of 2009, I guess. I worked on Left 4 Dead for 6 months, crunched like crazy, trying to get that out the door. They hired me full-time as an engineer shortly after that, and I worked on just all sorts of stuff for Left 4 Dead 2. I did some just random bug fixes. I worked with designers a lot, tracking down little things that were going wrong with maps. Minor bug fixes for Left 4 Dead 2 that I couldn't even tell you what they were. But then I started working on Portal 2, I think after that. Or was it Alien Swarm? I can't remember the order of things here. When I started on Portal 2, I basically took over and ran all the in-house playtesting that we were doing. You know, for any project we were working on, whether it was public or not, we playtest basically every day, almost every day. When Portal 2 was being worked on, I basically ran all the playtesting that we did for 2 years on that, and I worked on a bunch of really boring stuff like in-game telemetry and tooling to track players as they moved around maps, and I built out a internal web tooling to let us track down heat maps of how players moved through maps and where they shot portals and where they were looking and where they died and, you know, all that stuff.
Right.
Worked on an internal tool called, which is super hush-hush. No one talk about that. It was basically our in-house playtest aid, so we could stream video recordings of player screens to the whole company. Designers and programmers and artists and stuff would have up on a separate screen while they were throughout the day. And so, you know, I just worked on a bunch of random stuff. I think I had the last submission before we went to cert for Portal 2. We had a bug with a paint system on PS3. It was me and a friend of mine working probably, 2 in the morning or something. We found a fix for this bug that, like, definitely would have raised some hairs on some more senior engineers. Another pretty junior engineer made the last submit 6 hours before we went to cert the next day, so it was pretty good. I worked on a lot of the in-game UI stuff in Dota 2, so I worked on like the gold tracking chart and stuff, and most of my job was running playtests and like coordinating with designers and like trying to figure out what the heck needed some test coverage. And from the engineering side, it was mostly bug fixes and tooling. I built the Steam page for Alien Swarm, for instance. Did some like playtests, did some prototyping stuff, you know, random weapon things that I thought might be fun that sometimes were and sometimes weren't. I basically was like the bottom rung of the totem pole there, and so I just tried to do all the stuff that nobody else wanted to do. It was a good time. I had a lot of fun there.
That sounds like a very interesting journey. All of us are curious of inner workings of Valve's. A big question I've always had is, in your experience, what kind of work ethic and mindset do you think are required for someone to thrive at Valve?
Oh, that is a fantastic question, and this is the core of who I am as a developer. To thrive at Valve, you really have to be a problem domain-oriented thinker. We're basically super solution-oriented. To succeed at Valve, you have to kind of be problem-oriented. It's not good enough to say, well, hey, I just did my work and I checked this thing off the list, I did my task. You really have to say, here's the problem I'm actually trying to solve. I'm going to do 2 or 3 things until I solve this problem really well, and then I'll move on to the next problem. And that's one of the big differentiators for me, working at Valve versus, you know, some other companies I've worked at. The people who really kick ass at Valve are constantly thinking about player behavior. They're constantly thinking about how to solve interesting player problems or implement interesting player behaviors. And a lot of companies out there just hire engineers who are like, you are really good at building AI, so you go build AI. And regardless of what the game needs, you just go build AI. And Valve's like, no, we hire programmers who some have some deep specialization, some are pretty T-shaped, so there's an area of depth, but a lot of people at Valve tend to solve a lot of solve different problems. This is something I actually didn't really do very well when I was there. It also takes people realizing how to take shortcuts to solutions that solve their problems. Sometimes it's fine to spend a month on a solution to a problem, but a lot of times it's like hack in this fix and ship it, and it's dirty and it's gross and it won't pass code review at 2/3 of the companies out there. But you know what? We just got to move on to more important things. A good example actually is I think it was in Portal 2. It might have been Left 4 Dead. We had a last-minute cert failure where the screen wasn't refreshing quickly enough on map load, and so what was happening was we got cert back and it said your screen stays static for 5 seconds or something when you're loading between maps. An engineer came up with this crazy fix that was like, it would never fly at a bigger company, but they were like, you know what, it just happens to work out. We could just throw a render call into this piece of code that gets called when a certain type of object gets created when the map is loading. They hacked it in, you know, the single line of code got us through cert, and then I don't even know if there's a quote-unquote real fix right now. It's all about like getting your hands dirty and being able to identify real high-value player behavior, and then doing sort of whatever you need to do to achieve that player behavior or to solve that player problem. Not being too much of a code purist, not being too much of a snob about the quality of the code, because players don't see the code, you know, no one cares about your code. What they care about is the experience. I mean, you look around here and like there's 12 people or whatever have maintained TF2 now for what, 20 years, and you can't have a 20-year-old code base that's perfect and have the sort of stuff that's happened in TF2 happen, right? Like sometimes you gotta get dirty and write bad code and ship it.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Sounds like an inspiring workplace. How did community feedback help shape the development of Left 4 Dead 2, Portal 2, and Alien Swarm?
That's a good question. You know, as the guy who was basically running all the playtests for most games that were being worked on at Valve, community feedback's super important, but the type of feedback might not be super straightforward. The focus that Valve puts on observing player behavior is second to none, really. When there's something worth playing, then Valve will have people sit down and play it, and they'll just watch what happens. A lot of companies will do these like very subjective Q&A sessions. You know, there's a lot that can come from those Q&A sessions, but a lot of times what you get is players sort of, they don't really have all the context that is going into how the game is being built, and so a lot of times they'll offer up solutions, which again, you know, it's great to think about, but in observing players using your product, you see a lot of problems that players don't even themselves notice, or sometimes players will think something is a huge problem, but it's actually something completely different. Their brain is sort of rewired, and so they see something that's a big emotional impact, and then there's a consequence, and they think that other thing that is also a big emotional impact is somehow related, and a lot of times it's just not the case. I'll tell you, for Portal 2, for example, earliest prototypes of that game were play tested in probably 3 months after they started being worked on. Maybe 3 months, maybe not even 3 months. Alien Swarm, the reason I started working on it was because I sat down to play test it. I wasn't really keeping tabs on what was going on. I sat down and play tested it, and I was like, oh my god, this is amazing, I want to work on this. So all Valve games are really heavily invested in their customer, whoever the customer is, whether it's the community content creator, whether it's another professional in the industry. They're very focused on behaviors that are going to be good for the longevity of the product for the most part, and they're less focused on like, tell us what you want, and more focused on tell us what problems we can solve for you and we'll try to figure out.
We being TF2 players, I have to ask, did you have any involvement with TF2?
Yeah, I didn't work on it directly. I worked pretty closely with several people who worked on TF2, and I play tested it almost every day. One of my best memories from working there was actually when the first version of a new pyro weapon went in. Instead of having the gas blast that pushed objects away, it sucked objects towards you, and it sounds really fun. It sounds like a really cool idea, right? It's the sort of thing that like players would be like, oh my god, we should have this. Throw it in there, it'll be amazing. Yeah. But it became apparent immediately that it wasn't going to work when we had a server of 32 pyros flying around the map because ridiculous, but it was, you know, it was super fun. I like to say that like indirectly I worked on TF2 because I play tested this game internally probably more than just about anybody else.
That's awesome. You said you know Robin Walker, the creator of TF2, personally. Can you elaborate on your collaborations with him?
Yeah, so I've only talked to Robin, I don't know, maybe a couple dozen times. He was very focused on TF throughout all the projects, the different projects I worked on, but he really had an impact for me as a developer. The way he talked about thinking about TF2 really solidified how I think about game development right now. His focus was very much on the game as a product, not necessarily the game as a money-making machine, really as a thing that people can get invested in and dive into and invest their time. I heard him talk about like players investing their lives in TF2. He was just down to earth, and I thought he had a really healthy business-oriented mindset to how to approach game development. And so, yeah, it really stuck with me.
Any chance he'll join us for an event?
Oh, I don't know, man. I haven't talked to him for, I don't know, 15 years almost, probably.
Looking back on all that you've done at Valve, what was the most memorable moment working with a team?
That's kind of that's a tricky one. I mean, first of all, I haven't been at Valve for 12 years. There's a bunch of memorable moments. I worked really closely with Karen Prell, who was just one of my absolute favorite people there. She was a Jim Henson Muppeteer before she came to Valve. So I just have like a ton of great memories of like chatting her up and getting to know her, because I was like big Jim Henson fan when I was a kid. Probably like one of my favorite memories was we were playtesting Left 4 Dead 2, and it was the last campaign, and it was just sort of an internal, it's 5 p.m, let's all play some Left 4 Dead 2. You know, the game was pretty solid at this point. It was coming together. There were still little tweaks that we made before launch, but the game was basically in its final form. Like, the jockey wasn't a reskinned hunter anymore, and like the charger wasn't just like a one-man murder machine. But I remember we started the first map of the last campaign, I forget what it's called, but it's the one where you're on the boat. I was a charger, and all the survivor team ran up the handrail on that ramp going up, except one person, I can't remember who it was, but they ran up the ramp. I charged that one guy, nailed him, ran into the ramp that the other 3 survivors were on, which caused them to stumble back into the water, instantly one-shot the whole survivor team. It was just like such an epic moment. This is really cool too, because, and I don't know how much public information is out there on this, but we were doing some experiments with and it was just such a cool moment.
You said you're working on a new game. Is there anything exciting you can share, a hint about it?
Yes, I'm working on a new game. I can't really share anything super publicly yet, but it's a big open world game where players have a ton of creative freedom. A ton of shenanigans can happen. It supports 8 local players, so like 8 players sitting on a couch with 16 machines connected together across a network, so it's about 128 player open world co-op-y thing. I can't really share anything too exciting other than that. I mean, it's been ongoing for a while, and I actually just got something working yesterday I've been kind of pulling my hair out over, so I'm hoping to have some more public information probably early next year. I am actively talking to some publishers right now to try and find some funding for it, so we'll see how that goes.
Thank you for answering my questions. If I could have you answer a couple more questions from the audience. What role did you have in Portal 2?
I took the mantle of the test lead, and so I basically ran QA effort, which was just getting people together to try and find bugs, organized and ran all the playtesting that we did, and then built some tooling on the side. I worked like insane hours on Portal 2. I worked from like 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. 7 days a week for months and months and months at a time. I've learned a lot since then. I just worked on some like random bug fixes. I like helped people track down and debug some issues, and built a couple maps, but they had issues, and so they didn't make it into the final game for good reason.
What class do you relate to most often?
I think I have most time with the demo. It's probably demo or engineer.
What was the biggest change during playtesting for TF2 that made the final game fun?
Hands down for me, it was the melee weapons. It was sort of a joke, I think. Demo with the Claymore. It made its way into the game as like a very, very different way to play the game. I think some of the melee weapons, I don't know how many holiday events were happening before I started there, but I feel like the holiday events started happening while I was there. Because I feel like I was there for the first Halloween event. That was like huge. That might be where my clown mask is from.
What was it like working alongside many of the well-known employees at Valve?
It was intimidating as hell. I was like a nobody. I just came out of college and got hired at like my dream company. I was working alongside people that I knew in the industry, names that I recognized in the industry. My first office was 10 feet away from Gabe's office, which was intimidating. But it was super inspiring. It was cool to see so many super, super creative people and just so many super talented people just screw up sometimes, and like having that be okay. It was like super inspiring. I'm like, hey, wait, I know that guy. I've like followed his career, and wait, he just like caused the build to break? Oh man. It was super cool to see people who I looked up to and realize that like actually they're just human. They're just passionate about what they do. That also really, I want to say, cemented how I lead teams, because I've been an engineering lead basically ever since I left Valve. I was an engineering lead for the Scribblenauts Unlimited when that was launched. It's just watching people do what they did at Valve and realizing that they're human, but they're able to make amazing stuff when you just kind of get out of their way and let them play, let those objectives be sort of organic and defined by individuals, and sometimes someone goes way off the rails and things have to be corrected and they have to be brought back in. Like a great example actually is the Portal 2 launch arc. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but when Portal 2 was announced, it was basically an update to Portal 1, which kind of changed the ending and then embedded these crazy little hints throughout Portal 1 that Portal 2 was coming. The hints were like there was static in some of the radios that were spread throughout Portal 1. So if you took that static and ran it through a certain like program, it would generate a fuzzy image, and the fuzzy images would like come together and point to hints on the website or something. I don't remember all the details, but it was basically this one guy called Adam who just sort of pulled this idea out of his ass. You know what? I'm just gonna work on this. This sounds fun. This sounds interesting. What the hell? And he did a really cool job on it. It was making news like crazy, and it was getting 4chan, a lot of 4chan chatter before 4chan went a bit off the rails. It was the sort of thing that like no other company would ever do something like that. It's just because Valve had this culture where like there's no one really there pointing at something and saying like you have to go build this. Some of that does happen, but for the most part I think the leadership recognizes, the individuals recognize that when you hire hungry people who know how to do a thing and then get out of their way and sort of see what they do, a lot of times they'll make some really cool stuff. That really stuck with me, so that's how I try to lead right now. That's why I teach what I teach in game class at DigiPen. It's one thing to be able to say like I can go build this game, I can go build this AI system, I can go build this physics system. That's hard, but then it's almost harder to say I can do that, I have been successful at that, now I'm gonna like relinquish control to a bunch of other people on the team and see what they do. It's super rare in the games industry. Honestly, it just cemented how I feel about how good product development should look.
Why did you depart at Valve?
Oh man, the question of all questions. So this is my first job in the industry. I was, how you say, fairly immature as a human. Yeah, some stuff went down. At any rate, I got an email from a couple of guys at Valve that were in a position to make me not have a job anymore, and I responded in a very smart-ass way. So fast forward a few weeks and I did not have a job anymore. I actually talk about this in my first day when I introduce myself to my classes, because I did not take seriously the impact that just being a smartass would have on my career, and so it's something I've had to rein in a lot. I still actually really struggle with it. So like someone came to me with something related to my project and I just had this smartass answer typed up and I was like, nope, you know better. Just delete it, take a breath, take a few moments. To be honest with you, I was actually pretty burnt out by the time this all went down. There was a big change happening in the company. There were a bunch of us that were laid off around the same time. So I was kind of in a bit of an out group at Valve. I was in sort of the troublemaker group, I guess, and so a bunch of us got laid off. It's changed things culturally, internally, in ways that I don't really know, because, you know, I wasn't there. It was a cool experience, but yeah, be mindful, guys, your words matter. Words matter.
What qualifications got you to work at Valve?
It started with a source engine mod I worked on at DigiPen when I was a junior there. So I worked on the source engine mod with a couple of my roommates. The source engine mod was basically a recreation of the grapple, whatever the hell the grapple bugs are from Half-Life. You'd throw stuff into their tongue and it would like pull it up into the ceiling. We took one of those critters and we turned it into a grapple gun, and then we just built a whole like game around it basically. I built the first half of that experience. I thought I wanted to build maps for a living, but then I realized after trying to build maps professionally that I don't actually want to build maps for a living. I think me and two roommates built this grapple mod. That grapple mod was for a class that was taught by Robin Walker. That grapple mod went on to become Froggle, which was one of the more like polished DigiPen senior projects at the time. You know, Valve had this mindset that they would try to find people who had built mods for other games and bring them on to work on their projects. That's where the Alien Swarm team came from. That whole team was mod creators for, I think it was a Unreal Tournament mod. They basically saw the mod that we worked on, and, you know, I talked talked about all the stuff that I built and all the, not just the maps, but the gameplay code I did for that. Turned into a dozen other people, maybe 2 dozen people they interviewed total. And it was me and another guy called Kyle that they ended up hiring in this contract, like technical QA position. They ended up hiring me full-time as an engineer, and kind of struggled with in DigiPen was I never felt like I had any sort of desire to specialize in any one area. I just loved all aspects of game development. I really called myself a generalist. You know, I've been a generalist for basically my whole career, and that really helped. I think some of the people that I was competing with for the spot was like, they were super focused on rendering or physics or gameplay or whatever. I'm just like, yeah, I built a physics engine from scratch. Yeah, I built a rendering engine from scratch. Yeah, I built all this gameplay from scratch. My senior game, for instance, at DigiPen was an engine I built from scratch, practically solo. I had a little help a couple weeks from one of my roommates. And then the game that I built on top of it in 4 days, by the way, it was super fun. It was like a Wii Tanks clone, just different weapons and different weapon upgrades. So like you could play air hockey with tanks that could get upgrade, spread shot, or like homing missiles. But just being able to play air hockey with Wii Tanks was super fun. So being a generalist helped a lot, I think.
How did Valve's culture influence your projects?
Oh, in a bunch of ways, some good and some bad. I will actually say, I've said this a lot, Valve kind of ruined my career in a really awesome way. Valve makes games weird. It happens in an environment that just doesn't really exist in a lot of other game companies, I think. And you know, I've been around. I've worked at like 5 different game companies, one like game adjacent tech company. You know, so I've got like friends all over the industry. I keep in touch with people all over the area and stuff. The way that Valve functions just culturally and from a product development standpoint is just funky. It's just weird, you know? It's rare that you would find a place where someone could come in and just like create a new weapon on a whim and just like see what happened. To actually answer your question, Valve specifically working really closely with Mike Ambender, Valve's experimental psychologist, or first experimental psychologist, I guess, drastically changed how I think about game development. Working with Mike was like, everything that came out of that dude's mouth was like solid gold life lesson and product development lesson. And it was all about player behavior. Everything we did was about like, how do we get players to do X? Not like, hey, go build this feature. It was, how do we get players to pick this thing up or to notice this or to not do this? So anyway, he actually kind of cemented my focus on behavioral aspect of game development. The reason I say it's ruined my career is because the other companies I've worked at, they don't think that way. They just think in terms of features. Like, hey, you got to go build this feature. My first question out of my mouth is always, why? Why do you want me to build this feature? I want answers like, oh, it's because we're trying to get players to do X, Y, and Z, or we're trying to build a compulsion loop around this, or, you know, whatever it is. I've just been in positions where the actual answer I get will be something like, well, because I told you to, or do you know who I am? Or, you know, stuff that seemed like super egotistical and being a bit of a smartass. I don't respond very well to that. And so I've worked for guys who have been in the industry for 30 years. They asked me to do something and I'm like, cool, so talk to me about like where this is coming from, why you want this thing to exist, how's it going to help players, and they're like, just do it. And I'm like, okay, but you're taking all the fun out of this job. Come on, give me something to play with.
Yeah.
I mentioned that because it's how I try to lead people is to make sure that we're as a team on the same page in terms of the behaviors that we're trying to accomplish and the impact that those behaviors have on our business. It's not about like, oh, we think this behavior will maximize profit for our lifetime value of our customer. No, it's like, I just want everyone to be on the same page about why people should want to love this product. A lot of game industry products, especially AAA, I've worked for several AAA companies, and AAA is like the least creative space in the game industry right now. It's kind of crazy. You get one creative director who like calls all the shots, and then if the game misses, it's because the creative director who then blames the team and lays them all off, right? Valve really set the tone for me culturally that like the more trust you give people and the more you work with them to develop their own boundaries within which to work, and then the more freedom you can give them to try crazy stuff and to think outside of the box and to, you know, try new skills. It's insane the impact that can have on creative endeavors.
Why does Valve struggle with community communication? Any personal inputs on how they can improve?
Yes. Oh my god, let me tell you a story. I was like, I think I was number 3 or number 4 working on CSGO. I was pumped. I was like getting into the code base. I've never really looked at CS code base before. We were working with another company on some stuff. I got on some forums and I mentioned something about trying to get get something to work in poor internet conditions, and I think I said something like, in places in Eastern Europe, end quote. The community took that quote. It was like the second time I'd posted in the CS community or something. The community took that quote and they ran with it. There was like 20 pages of
Oh no.
chat about like that quote, and I'm like, whoa, okay, like I gotta correct this. All I'm trying to say is like, I'm just trying to help with this issue that is in Counter-Strike CS source for years, and like I'm just trying to help. For me, nobody at Valve ever like trained me how to interact with the community. It was just a sort of like, we trust you, go out there, don't screw it up. Like my second time out, I felt like I screwed it up. It really turned me off from wanting to engage personally. My thought honestly is kind of twofold here. If people at Valve aren't engaging with the community, it's one, because there is probably some hesitation to engage with the community, because if someone says something slightly wrong, they'll be dragged through the mud for forever, you know? Or two, they're just in love with what they're building and it just doesn't come to mind, which I think is probably true for like 99% of people that are working there right now. They're just loving what they're doing and their focus is on, you know, building cool stuff and not necessarily engaging with the community.
What platforms will your new game be on?
Officially PC, targeting PS5, maybe PS4, Xbox Series, if that still exists, and Switch 2.
Did you get to test the MVM mode that they have in TF2 here?
I don't know what MVM means. What's MVM?
Man versus machine, players versus bots game mode.
The players versus bots. Yes, I did. Yes. That came out after I left, I think. God, when did that come out? That came out in like 2015, right?
What was your biggest challenge working at Valve?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I feel like I didn't recognize the political situation that I was in there, and I've heard people since talk about some of the cliques that formed at Valve, and I just didn't realize that I was like part of a clique that was like in the crosshairs of some powerful people that had a lot to say. And so for me, honestly, it was the politics of the studio. I just never thought about it. I hate office politics. I struggle with the same thing at Microsoft, to be honest. I just want to make cool stuff. I don't want to think about like political ramifications of like how to convince my manager to get me a 8% raise versus a 5% raise. And like, I just don't care about that crap, man. I just want to make cool stuff. I want to make cool stuff and be happy doing it. Dealing with the politics, man, it's just probably blowing the politics already at DigiPen. Been there for a couple of years and managed to stay out of at any school politics, but I'm sure I've said something at some point to someone that triggered something. I don't know.
I think I got one more.
Ask about the pay.
Oh yeah, someone did ask about that.
I'll tell you, game developers don't get paid nearly as well as non-game developers. I doubled my salary when I left the game industry for a couple of years, and then I halved it to get back into the game industry. When I got back in, I was making about 150K. If I would have stayed at the job that I had at the time, it would be like almost 400K a year, stocks and bonuses and everything. Yeah, I made poor decisions.
Companies don't pay their fair share. Is that true as well at Valve?
Well, I mean, companies pay pretty well. Like, I honestly don't even remember what I made at Valve, but I'll tell you, I think I had like a $50,000 bonus, and I think I was making about 65 grand a year when they hired me full time. Gabe rolls up and gives everyone a $10,000 Christmas bonus. For me, I just had like 60 grand land in my lap or something like that, and I was like, hey honey, let's buy a house. Like, what are we doing? You know, Valve can afford that. Gabe can afford that. Steam makes Valve a ton of money, mostly from Valve games. You know, I don't know any recent numbers, but when I was there, the majority of Valve's income, and for a long time after, comes from Valve games. It's not from other third-party games. They make really successful stuff for the most part. Gabe's doing fine. I mean, I don't know where he's at. I don't think Gabe's gonna sell to Microsoft anytime soon.
Do you know how Valve's workshop selection or just workshop works at all?
I do, yeah. I actually worked on some workshop stuff way back in the day, and for a while there, I worked on some workshop features for Scrib Unlimited, which was the most used workshop of any game on Steam for a long time. They had something like 250,000 entries in the workshop. It's sort of a double-edged blade. You get a lot of stuff that's created, and about 10% of it is great, and then the other 90% of it you could probably live without. The thing that works really well, though, is that it's not up to Valve to determine what 10% is really great. If you paid attention to Professor Fraser's lecture last week, he talked about this, right? Like, you have people who love chunky tomato sauce in their spaghetti, and you have people who love smooth tomato sauce in their spaghetti. And so if you try to make a spaghetti sauce that is, you know, half chunky, then you just end up with two populations of people don't
Aren't
like your
satisfied.
product.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not satisfied. And so what the workshop does really well is it gives people a lot of weird choices that they wouldn't otherwise get. A lot of game development, honestly, it's business, right? And so it comes down to, realistically, how many people do we think are going to buy this thing if we create it? And realistically, is that going to be worth us spending money creating? The cool thing about the workshop, especially with community created items, is that you can have someone that creates a wacky thing that only 100 people love, but they love it, and then nobody else cares, but the 100 people that love it to death. And that sort of stuff will never be created in a big game company. It's just not commercially viable, right? You can't spend $50,000 or $100,000 developing something that's going to turn around and make you $500. The flip side, though, is that sometimes the community gets a little rambunctious and creates some stuff that, you know, you probably shouldn't.
Big slappy.
I remember when the sprays were introduced in
Oh God.
TF2.
We still have to ban people for that occasionally.
But I saw some really creative uses of sprays. I saw.
Everyone spray behind him. Everyone spray behind him.
Oh God. I don't even know what my spray would be.
Isn't that?
But, yeah, I saw like the best use of the sprays, right? It's such a goofy mechanic. I was playing TF2 one day after I'd left Valve. I'd instigated TF Tuesdays at a company I was working at where we played TF2 over lunch. I was playing TF2 with some coworkers, and this guy had a spray that said, in really, really small writing, it said this really long convoluted sentence about how the guy who left the spray was a spy. And so he'd spray it on the wall, and people would have to get really close to read it, and they're going through it like this, and you can see him moving. And then the guy's just behind him, and then obviously backstabs him.
Yeah.
And makes like the best TikToks if TikTok existed at the time.
Thank you guys. Thank you everyone for attending. Everyone say thank you to David for the interview. Appreciate everyone.
Thank you.
All right, let's do a photo. Everyone get behind him. Just scoot up a little bit there.
Sorry, I forgot the hotkey to emote. What's the hotkey?
It's a G.
Yes. Excellent.
I can't even see him, guys. All right, thank you, David.